We're going to talk about two things. You've got to restore healthy digestive secretions and the healthy gut biome. It's the digestive secretions, innate secretions made by your body that are regulating the bowel movement and the adequate healthy gut biome that's making the stool. So you can't have a healthy stool unless you've got those two pieces. And we're going to talk about how to support that through different foods and supplements that support your stomach secretions, your digestive enzymes, bile flow, a healthy gut lining, which is absolutely necessary for good bowel movements, adequate biome or beneficial bacteria, and healthy diet and fluid intake. If you're doing all of this, you're really doing all of this and it's not working, you need to get tested. You might have a subclinical infection, meaning your gut biome is just so far off that doing these natural interventions isn't enough. Or there may be some other issue, but it definitely needs further testing if you're trying all of this stuff and not getting where you want to be. And part of it is that there are many different underlying causes of constipation. There's just so many. And so it's not just one size fits all when you're addressing constipation. And sometimes people have multiple underlying causes, and those causes really all need to be addressed in order for them to have healthy regularity. So, for example, just lack of chewing can be a big issue for people. When you chew, you are allowing your nervous system to sense through your saliva, what does it have to make for the meal? So if you're chewing real fast and swallowing, you're really busy, you're watching TV, you're talking, and you're not chewing, that in and of itself is going to work against your healthy digestion. So you want to chew once for every tooth. So for most foods, this is 20 to 30 chews per bite. The yogis would say chew once for every tooth until the food is a paste and then swallow. It's also really important to have adequate stomach acid. I'm going to say this over and over again, but stomach acid is the true north of digestion. If you don't have good stomach acid happening, it's not balanced, you've got heartburn, or you don't have heartburn, but you're bloated and you're constipated all the time, then the digestion's never really going to work for you. So stomach acid is really the true north of digestion. It's so important. And we'll talk about ways to restore that. For some people, a sign of low stomach acid is that they eat food and it just kind of sits in their stomach, especially if they eat a protein, which very heavily relies on stomach acid. They eat an animal protein, they feel like it's a brick in their stomach. That's a sure sign that they're low in stomach acid. Other signs that can indicate low stomach acid are a lot of burping, a lot of bloating, chronic constipation, issues with heartburn and acid reflux. So those don't all have to occur, but if you have one of those things, it might be a sign. You can also look at lab tests. I can look at lab tests for people from a functional lens. So I use different ranges than a medical doctor would. And I can see from the markers in the comprehensive metabolic panel that someone's probably low in their stomach acid. So I'll often use that if there's a question like, oh, there's constipation, let's look at your labs because we'll be able to see. And that's not something a typical medical doctor is going to know how to do or have a conversation with someone about. Lack of adequate bile is another big reason for constipation. Our liver makes bile all the time and it's storing it in the gallbladder. And then the gallbladder is kind of like a water tower where it's releasing the bile. And that bile is just as essential as the stomach acid. It's like the general of digestion. So if the bile moves, the bowel's going to move. So if you have irregular bile flow or you just don't make a lot of bile, then you're going to tend to be more constipated. For a lot of people, the sign that this is happening is they might have problem digesting fats or high fat food, or they might have signs that they don't get enough fat, like they might have really dry skin because they're just not digesting fat. They might be hungry all the time because they're not digesting and absorbing their fat. And you can't always figure it out by the symptom. Sometimes you have to test. And so I have a test in the GI panel that I'll talk about in a little bit that tests for bioflow to identify this for people when this is their problem. Sometimes it's just a bad diet. The diet's not suited to the person, or the person has food sensitivities, or they're just not drinking enough water, or their water does not have enough electrolytes. Sometimes someone's gut lining has been damaged through stress, through exposure to chemicals or medications, through different life events. That gut barrier can break down. And so that can make it really difficult to have a healthy gut lining, which is producing the biome to make a healthy stool for someone regularly. That kind of goes with my next bullet here, having poor flora. So if you're treated with antibiotics that can eliminate the flora and cause constipation for people. If you weren't breastfed, if you just have extensive stress or trauma, that can definitely cause constipation by affecting the nervous system and the gut flora. And there's definitely a feedback loop there. This next one, too alkaline intestinal pH, is one that isn't talked about, but I find is extremely successful in helping people with resolving their constipation. So I mentioned that the stool is made by the bacteria fermenting the leftovers that you haven't absorbed in your gut. And those bacteria need an acidic environment. And for a lot of people, when their gut becomes too alkaline, they just really struggle. Like taking a probiotic doesn't seem to make a difference. It doesn't seem to make a difference what they eat. They just don't have the right pH. They don't have enough stomach acid typically in this scenario, but they also sometimes just need more help making the intestine acidic too, so that the right bacteria can grow and make a stool. So there's a couple of tips that can help with that. Sometimes people have an infection in their gut, and this might be something that's undetected by the medical community, and you can detect it with a functional medicine stool test that I offer. And so sometimes if the gut biome is just really out of balance, then that can be addressed naturally or in concert with a medical doctor to help with resolving the chronic digestive issues. Sometimes people have issues with heavy metal poisoning. I don't see this as frequently, but it is a thing that can cause constipation for people because if someone does have extensive heavy metal exposure, it can basically disrupt their gut biome to the point where they're not making a healthy stool. Also, just chronic stress can very much cause constipation. We need to be in a balanced sympathetic and parasympathetic state for our nervous system in order to have healthy digestion. And if we're in the sort of distressed or strung out or upregulated sympathetic state more often than the parasympathetic, then we're not going to rest and digest and have healthy elimination. That's why, when a lot of people travel, constipation is much more noticeable for them, or their typical things that they do for constipation don't work just because of the stress of the travel. And sometimes when this is happening chronically, people have issues with their vagal nerve, and that sort of creates more digestive issues for them. So we're going to talk about most of the things here, but I'm just trying to give you a broad scope of how many things can affect constipation, and there's many things I didn't even put on this slide today. Finally, I just wanted to mention that having low thyroid hormone can cause chronic constipation too, because all of the cells in the body need thyroid hormone to function healthfully. So sometimes we see that constipation can be from an imbalance in thyroid hormone. So I want to emphasize that what might work for one person is not necessarily going to work for another person to resolve constipation. And now you kind of understand, well, there could be a lot of different things going on. So maybe this fiber helps one person, and for another person, the fiber is the worst thing. Um, and in a lot of cases, if we're not having any luck, I would do this GI map for someone to get so much more information about what's going on in their body and then be able to really target what we do for constipation to get results really, much more quickly than just trial and error of all these other things. So, the important features of a healthy digestive system are healthy digestive secretions. So, we're going to talk about that, the healthy gut biome, healthy food, healthy water, including the right type of fiber for someone, perhaps. Healthy vagal tone, so the nervous system has to be supported. And then key supports, so things like magnesium, making sure the thyroid is supported, getting healthy exercise, like all of these things are really important. So let's start with talking about the stomach acid and the digestive secretions. Digestion is like a north-south process. By that, I mean, if north is the top, then everything starts at the north and goes to the south. And that's very important to keep in mind because what's happening with the stomach is up here at the north end. Also, what happens in your mouth, how relaxed you are. If you're sitting, you're chewing, you're tasting, you're sensing, all of that is very helpful for stimulating the secretions. But what's going on in your stomach is really critical for having healthy bowel movements. So there are a number of things that help promote healthy stomach acid. Stomach acid is an acid bath that your body makes that enables the other enzymes in your stomach to start to break down the food. And the acid bath, once it moves out of your stomach with the food, with that's beginning to be digested, that acidity really helps interact with the rest of the part of the digestive system. So we'll talk about that. So you want to do what you can to have balanced stomach acid and promote that. So salt is a very easy, accessible food that can stimulate the stomach for many people. Things like lemon juice or apple cider vinegar and water are very gentle things that can be somewhat stimulating. Betaine hydrochloride is a supplement from beets, and it's much stronger than lemon juice and apple cider vinegar and salt. And so I find when someone truly does have constipation, we usually need something like betaine hydrochloride. You can also use bitter herbs. You might have heard of different bitter herbs like catnip, gentian, chamomile. Um, there's many different bitter herbs. Sometimes they come in a blend. Personally, I really like to use the betaine hydrochloride. I think in general, people get better results, but not everybody likes betaine hydrochloride or wants to take it for whatever reason. And so the alternative would be to take the bitters. When you do take betaine hydrochloride, you typically want to take it for the first time in the middle of the meal because when you swallow it, if you don't have food pushing it down or food with it, it may begin to really stimulate stomach acid in your esophagus, and it might give you this sense of like heat that for some people might not feel good until they actually eat some food and push it down into their stomach. So I tell people take it in the middle of the meal. And then there's a protocol for increasing it to a high dose to like wake up your stomach again and then titrating off of it. The other digestive secretion that happens next is the bile flow from the liver gallbladder, which is pictured here. And so the stomach acid with the food is going to come down into the small intestine and the body's going to be sensing, do we need a lot of pancreatic enzymes from the pancreas? And do we need, how much bile do we need? How much fat is in here? In this food we've digested. And so the body's going to release bile from the gallbladder and release some enzymes from the pancreas when it's healthy. And then the bile is very alkaline, and the stomach acid obviously is acidic. And so the two coming together at opposite pHs is like pop and sizzle, really starting to interact, breaking things down, breaking the nutrients out of the food, sending a strong signal to your gut too to have peristalsis and move things through. So you not only want to have the support for the stomach, you want to have the support for the bile flow too. And the thing that moves bile is fats, especially oils like olive oil. I would not be eating a lot of seed oils like soy, canola, um, corn. Those are unhealthy oils in general. We can talk about that in the Q&A at the end if you want. But you want to do olive oil, coconut oil would also be good. Any fat, high fat foods, nuts, seeds. But really, the oils are most beneficial for people if they have an issue with bile flow. Salt, again, kind of comes to the rescue to help with bile flow too. You can do different bitter herbs like dandelion root or triphala, which is an Ayurvedic herb. Beets are a wonderful food for supporting bile building and moving bile out. And prunes, especially if they're soaked, are also very good at helping move bile. That's why they're kind of an age, a home remedy for constipation. So I mentioned the stomach, I mentioned the bile flow from the liver gallbladder. Next, the pancreas is in there releasing enzymes that are going to help completely break down the food. And this complete breakdown of the food is really important because if you're not breaking the food down the way you should with the help of these secretions, then it's bacteria that are going to do it, and that's going to give you unhealthy fermentation. So there's healthy fermentation that's happening in the colon, and there can be really unhealthy fermentation, unhealthy immune reaction with a lot of food sensitivities and autoimmune tendency because someone's not breaking their food down. So it sounds very basic, but it can actually have pretty far-reaching consequences into health. This pictured here are supplements called digestive enzymes. The Allegheny Nutrition enzymes are an example of a plant-based enzyme that can be pretty powerful, but more mild than the pancreatic enzyme, which is pictured on the right, which is usually from an animal source, and a lot stronger. And so again, when I do a special GI map stool test on someone, I can measure their pancreatic output and see if the problem is that they need more support from the pancreas. So sometimes that can be very helpful. It can also be very helpful to have foods that kind of moisten and lubricate. If the stool is becoming very dry or the person has a dry tendency already, the diet is very dry, very processed, very flour based, or just dry in other ways, then the person might be more prone to constipation. So you can eat foods like okra and asparagus that are naturally very high in what's called mucilage that help to hold on to water and kind of lubricate the digestive process, and that can help a lot. Black sesame seeds are a Chinese remedy that can be added. You could have a couple spoonfuls of black sesame a day, chewing them up, of course, chewing them until they're a paste. Herbs like marshmallow root, licorice root help to add mucilage if what the person is needing is just more moisture. I would not use licorice if you have an issue with blood pressure being high because licorice can raise the blood pressure because of its effect on adrenal hormones. You can also try to do more insoluble fiber, and I'm going to talk about soluble fiber a little later. So things like psyllium, veggies, like leafy greens are basically roughage. So sometimes roughage can help with moistening and lubricating, um, and sometimes not. We'll talk a little bit about that, but for a lot of people, it can be helpful. When you're thinking about the proper food and you're constipated, it might be really helpful to avoid these constipating things, at least for a little while, until you have things better under control. And then you might be able to have some of these things without becoming constipated again. But it's very much an individual process, and you've got to sort of cultivate this awareness around how what you're eating is affecting your body if you don't already do that. Dairy Like cow dairy can be a big constipator. Dairy has a very large peptide structure and it can be hard to break down. And so for some people, it can be very drying and very constipating. Grains like wheat, but even things like rice and quinoa, and especially their flour products where the grains have been milled down to flour, can be extremely drying and constipating. Yes, I know that these foods are very high in fiber, and so they're often people are told but to eat them. But the people I work with are people that are pretty sensitive. I see a lot of people who have had chronic digestive issues and they've gone all over the place and tried a lot of things. And so, with the sensitive population that I work with, I typically say don't eat any grains for the beginning. Let's get your carbohydrate needs met from other things like sweet potatoes or squash. Um, and let's eliminate the grains. They're just so hard to digest. And if someone has had a long-standing digestive issue for a long time, chances are good grains might not really be their friend. So we kind of do a trial where we take the grains out. Alcohol, caffeine, sugar. These are foods that can really make a situation with constipation worse. Sugar, when people have a sensitivity to sugar, the main symptom of that is constipation. So a lot of people aren't aware of that. Um, so it can be helpful for many reasons to eliminate sugar if you watched any of my other talks. Coffee can be a little bit, well, so coffee can go both ways. For some people, coffee is very helpful because of the bitterness. But I'd say if you feel like coffee's not helping you anymore, especially because of the caffeine, it might be helpful to eliminate coffee and try some other things. Peanut butter, it's kind of like dairy. It's a big constipator, really hard on the gut. So I would eliminate peanut butter and maybe use other nut butters if you're a big fan of nut butters. And bananas in general, ripe or unripe, can be big constipators too. So it can be a lot better to use fruits with a P. Fruits that start with a P are usually really good. So plums, prunes, pears, those are much better alternatives to having banana for someone who's constipated. Okay, and then you want to think about increasing certain foods to help with the constipation. So lots of healthy oils and fats to help with getting that bile flow, which will help the constipation. Sea salt, which will help with stimulating both the stomach acid and the bile flow. Uh, and lots of vegetables, fish, seafood, meats. These are usually very helpful. Fiber, do you want to do fiber? Well, it really depends on the person. So there's many different types of fiber supplements and high fiber foods. Psyllium husk is one of the more common, or ground flax or chia. Some of those can be okay, but for some people, just adding more fiber feels like they're adding more cars to a traffic jam. And for years and years, we've heard this advice, take fiber for constipation, but it really doesn't work for everybody. And finally, there was a study a number of years ago in 2012 that actually showed when people stopped adding their or reduced their dietary fiber intake, they actually felt much better. They had a lot less gas and bloating and got some relief from their constipation by stopping fiber. And that's because for many people, what is driving their constipation, it has to do with their gut biome. And when your gut biome's out of balance and you give it more fiber, it just gets more out of balance. So you need to do something like a therapeutic diet or some of these other things I'm talking about to rebalance your gut biome first, in order to begin to be able to tolerate fiber. And still, you may not ever be a person who needs to take a lot of fiber. So sometimes it helps to go in the opposite direction. I really like to recommend foods that are high in soluble fiber for people who have issues with regularity and constipation in general. So cooked vegetables are going to be much better than raw vegetables because it's going to change. and make more of that soluble fiber available. So, like winter squash and pumpkin are some of my favorite foods to have people eat some of every day. Even multiple meals is fine. Celery is another good food. Sweet potatoes are another example. The soluble fiber absorbs a lot of water, and so it becomes more like a nice soft gel in the digestive system rather than really rough, like chia mite or flaxseed or something else. So everybody's a little different. I'm not trying to say that it's a one size fits all here or that this is bad or this is good. I'm just trying to give you some ideas of what can work if you tried some things and they haven't worked for you. So it's really important to eat proteins and vegetables and fats. Even for our youngest members of our families, this really helps to establish a healthy gut biome. You see a lot of kids eating a lot of very processed, very dry food. And I mean, parents are really busy. I totally get it that you need things that are easy. Your kids are hungry all the time. But you'll see a big improvement in resolving constipation for young kids, kids of all ages, if you're giving them whole foods and getting them off of the processed and very dry things. Water obviously is very important too. For an adult, you need 3 to 4 quarts daily. So that's about a gallon daily. But for some people, that water works so much better if they've got electrolytes in it. So you can get an electrolyte powder, one that doesn't have a sweetener. And you can get that like at the Willie Street Co-op, or I have some available through my office too. Um, and or just adding like a pinch of sea salt. It might not be as comprehensive in electrolytes, but that's kind of a way you can make your own electrolyte drink. Next, I want to talk about the gut biome. As I've been saying, the gut biome, the healthy bacteria in your gut, are what make the stool. So if you're having trouble with regularity, you might not really be feeding your gut biome the way that you need to. And they do so many good things for us. Some of those functions are listed here: defending against pathogens, combating obesity, helping us absorb nutrients, helping us detox, um, many things. And one of the best foods for the gut biome can be to have healthy ferments. So things like sauerkraut and kimchi are fermented vegetables. In my opinion, these are much better for someone with a digestive issue than something like kombucha, because the kombucha is a type of bacteria and yeast that like sugar. So you don't want to eat things that like sugar. You want to eat things that like vegetables. Another important piece to having a healthy biome is feeding it the right thing. So, one of the best prebiotic foods are lentils and mung beans. So, I have here a recipe from my website for mung dal. I love this recipe. It's like a curry dal soup. If you don't like curry, you can definitely make other forms of these legumes in a soup or a bean dip, or incorporating them into your other favorite stews. These foods need to be prepared properly, though, in order to feed the good bacteria and not irritate your gut lining. So, like I said, I work with a lot of sensitive people, people who've had food sensitivities and issues with leaky gut. And sometimes legumes are off the menu in the beginning for those people because they're just the legumes and beans are causing too much gas and bloating because the person doesn't have the right bacteria for them. But you can begin to eat these foods that you haven't been able to eat again if you prepare them properly and if you've worked on your different digestive issues, and getting it tested or taking different supplements that help improve your gut health can go a long way. This is a picture of the mung beans getting soaked. So I would do two 12-hour soaks, rinsing in between. So I'm putting the beans in a bowl, I'm covering it, I'm letting it sit for 12 hours. I rinse it all, I add more water, I let it sit for another 12 hours, then I rinse all of that, then I cook the beans. And I will do this with any bean that I cook in my household because this process really helps to eliminate the lectins and phytates and different things in the legume that are going to be a barrier to my digestive system and give me more symptoms and keep this really powerful prebiotic resistant starch or butyrate food for a butyrate producer from getting digested. So you just do this extra soaking process, and then I would cook the beans until they're very soft. I know a lot of times when you bring like lentils or some beans home from the store, it might say to cook them for 30 minutes. And like, that is not at all long enough for someone who has digestive issues. You've got to cook it until it's very, very soft. So I would be cooking for a couple hours, lentils, until they're nice and soft, and then I would use them in a recipe. Um, but I'm emphasizing this because it can be really hard to rebuild a healthy gut biome if you're low in your good bacteria. And how do you know if you're low in your good bacteria? Well, you don't really know until you test. So that's why the stool test is really important. Stool tests can be expensive, so I recognize not everybody has access to a stool test like the GI map. But if you don't have access to that, then sometimes going through someone's history helps us identify that their levels of good bacteria are probably pretty low. And if you can eat the right prebiotic foods, that's going to go a really long way to helping you overcome your digestive troubles and your food sensitivities and whatever else is in the picture for a person. And you can start with just eating a little bit, like just a couple bites for someone who normally can't eat beans. And I would do that for a week, and then I would try to eat a little more. And if I got a lot of gas, I would go, okay, I'm not quite ready. I'm going to eat a little less and tr slowly try to work up to having like a quarter cup of cooked lentils or mung bean or some other bean every day. And that is a wonderful prebiotic food and a good way to build up the gut bacteria. You can also do it with probiotics. Some people will get great results with probiotics, other people won't. So again, testing and trial and error can help you kind of navigate that. This is one made for kids that's pretty tasty. There's obviously a lot of different probiotic supplements out there. This is one of the products I like to use that helps with the intestinal pH. So I mentioned earlier in the talk that sometimes people's bowel is just way too alkaline. If your bowel is too alkaline, you will be chronically constipated. You might also have a really smelly gas, or when you do have a bowel movement, it's like you've got to turn the fan on. It's sorry to be graphic, but it's just going to be very, very stinky. That can be a sign that the pH is off. Uh, and so if you're someone who's got chronic constipation, sometimes a situation where you have tried a lot of things, this can be really helpful to take the standard process product, lactic acid yeast tablets, because they help feed the good bacteria and really readjust the biome and help the person with having regular bowel movements. And they have some other products that are like this too, but I just wanted to call this out as an example. The closest thing in the food world would be like eating fermented vegetables, like sauerkraut. But I find sometimes that is not as strong. I really like to use this product with children because it's chewable, it's extremely safe, and I just get really great results. I use it with adults too, like people that have had diverticulitis where, now the research on that condition is saying really to avoid having a flare in diverticulitis, you can't get constipated. So you've got to keep the stool moving. So I find just helping keep the intestinal pH where it is by giving this prebiotic supplement to attract the lactofermenting bacteria is an extremely helpful tool. I also really like to do this in people who have a history of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or SIBO, where they can't tolerate eating a lot of starches. They get really bloated from eating different kinds of types of carbohydrates and starches. This really helps to keep the gut biome supported so that they can ingest those foods again and not be so prone to having a SIBO overgrowth. Oh, I guess that was a little unnecessary word there, but okay. Next is things like glutamine, L-glutamine, and zinc carnosine. These are ingredients in a formula like this one that really help the gut cells to communicate with each other better. And so I like to use this when there's some kind of test showing me the person has leaky gut or other indicators in their lives that they've got a leaky gut tendency. And I have a whole nother talk on leaky gut. You can go to my website, humannaturellc.com, and see all those other lectures, including the leaky gut lecture. I'll be giving another talk about leaky gut later this summer. But one of the classic signs of leaky gut is the presence of autoimmunity or chronic disease and or the presence of a lot of sensitivities. So glutamine is one of the active ingredients in a formula like this, and it can be really helpful for constipation. And it's such a simple thing that I like to recommend that supplement sometimes too. All right. So we talked a lot about just supporting the digestive system. There are a lot of things you can do to help get your nervous system online, especially if your constipation seems to kind of be chronic and seems to maybe stem from how stressed you are, or some, some life event that surrounded stress. So there's a couple things you can really easily do to help with the bowel movement and signaling to your nervous system to be more active. The vagus nerve is the largest nerve in the body. As it's pictured here, it starts up in the base of the brain and then goes around the throat area, and then goes down around the digestive system. And so gargling can be very stimulating to the vagus nerve, and gagging can also be very stimulating. Humming, singing, because it's around our throat and our vocal cords. And so you want to have really healthy vagal tone. You want to have the vagus nerve stimulated because then it helps with the peristalsis, the wave-like motion that just naturally sets in when you wake up in the morning and naturally stimulates when you eat a meal, when you're swallowing. So sometimes when people have a lot of problems with swallowing, that can be a sign they have an issue with vagal tone, or if they have some kind of chronic nausea, that often can be from vagal issues. More recently, there have been some items on the market that are vagal nerve stimulation devices. True Vega is one of them, and it's a little, I should have brought it to show you today, but it's just a little handheld device that sends a signal in your neck to stimulate your vagus nerve. And so it can be very relaxing and help with things like sleep, but also help with issues with swallowing or issues with digestive regularity, because it's just toning up that nerve that does so many things. So the vagal nerve, we could talk for an hour about the vagal nerve, but I just wanted to give you some of those ideas. If you're going to gargle in the shower or gag, you know that you've stimulated the vagus nerve when your eyes tear up or they start to water. So you really do want to like hang your head back like you're an opera singer, and gargle pretty hard if you're trying to gargle in the shower to stimulate it. But if you do that regularly, that can help a lot with more regular bowel movements. And let's not forget, the other basic thing, exercise. Here's a study that showed that 20 to 30 minutes daily helped improve people's constipation symptoms. So a lot of it can be like, let's just get back to some very basic support. Okay, so I feel like obviously I've been talking for a long time, but sometimes when I talk to someone about constipation, we have more questions than we have answers in the beginning. Like maybe they haven't done the stool test yet, or they don't have the money to do a stool test, and they're going to have to try some dietary changes and try some things that help with the digestive secretions or the biome. What I would do in the meantime is give some remedies that really help make sure that the bowel starts moving. So, vitamin C, magnesium, hydration, especially with the electrolytes and salt added. These can be invaluable tools at helping someone have regular bowel movements. And, and they work just as well as Miralax without the side effects. So, like for a lot of kids, many times I'll work with the parents to give magnesium to the kid and see if that can work just as well for a child. Um, For the vitamin C and the magnesium, you're probably starting at a minimum of 500 milligrams for an adult, and then you can increase it to bowel tolerance. So that means you're giving these things that are going to hold more water in the stool, and they're just going to keep holding water until there's a bowel movement, and then the body's going to move the vitamin C or the magnesium out. So it's pretty hard to hurt yourself with these techniques because you're just going to move it out in the bowel movement if you take too much. So you can keep that in mind. It's very safe. If you're very backed up, you're very constipated, you should be warned that it might be uncomfortable to start moving that stool out. There's, baths, massage, many different things you can do to help ease that discomfort, all changing your diet temporarily while you're working out. All that stored stool in your gut can be important, but I just don't want you going into it thinking, oh, this is gonna clean me out and I'm gonna feel amazing. For a lot of people, yes. But for some people, if there's a lot of hard compacted stool in there, then it may be a day or two of having a stomach ache or feeling nauseous while you're getting healthier. So try to keep that in mind. And you can always go a little slower and reach out to a practitioner like myself for help and guidance to get through that if you're someone where, when you do try to do things, you tend to get more sick. Um, so just to reiterate, it can be important to just like, let's keep the stool moving while we're changing the diet and working on some of these foundational things. Calm is a magnesium powder that I often encourage people to use, but you can use the capsules I just talked about. For kids, this Kids Tummy Relief is an example of a bitters formula that can help a lot with getting things moving without using harsh laxatives. And let's not forget other modalities like massage. And this is not just for kids. I went online to look this up to give you guys a resource about this, and it was all around babies. But I'll do the tummy massage on myself when I feel like, oh, I feel, like I need a little help today, that I feel like my stomach's a little bloated. And all you do is the I love you. So on the I, you draw a line down your descending colon on your left side. So it's like you're moving out that stool that's closest to coming out first. Then you do love, you do an L where you go across the transverse colon and down the descending colon. And then U, where you come up the ascending colon. So you're coming up, going across, and then down. Um, and so don't be afraid to give yourself a massage and you can find videos on how to do this massage online, and give yourself a gentle massage. There's a number of talented practitioners in our area too that do abdominal massage that can help with these things as well. Here's the GI map again. If you're feeling really stuck and you're not getting anywhere, I can't obviously say this enough that it's really helpful to test and figure out what you need to do to support healthy digestion. So just a summary, we talked about restoring the different digestive secretions and promoting the gut biome. And then if you need more support, you want to probably look at some lab work and try to figure out what else is going on in there that you're missing.